Coalescing out of the deeper darkness, we are the ever-present confusing mass of rebellion. 665.66 UHMR Chemrat Radio, coming to you live tonight from the hangnail, down here on sublevel 999.
You know, guys, aside from judging all the bar food, you know I gotta keep up on my food blog. 5 toilets to never miss in the Underhive.
Nice plug, Marky.
So good, it'll blow your ass out. Seal of approval. I've always wondered where exactly they got all these crazy-ass Xenos and demon skulls.
Coldest Sam second Underhive, though. Put that in your blog.
You're supposed to do like hashtag advert or something, right? Like after that.
It's asterisk in our
What's
Underhive.
going on here? 5 toilets to never miss in the Underhive. Check it out wherever you get your Underhive blogs. Just as unstable as all that plasma I like so much, I am your host, Goblin King. Destroying these Underhive restaurants from his very own golden throne. It's the maniacal mauler of munchies, Marky.
What's up, bitches?
And the great white haunter of the Frost Hollow, our very own polar bear, ChuckerFly.
Hello, and I kind of wonder how much of that white stuff Malcador had ingested.
How much warp dust? Welcome to episode 94 of Under the Hive of Madness, Heroes of 40k, Malcador the Sigilite. Normally, when we get into our Heroes of 40k series, we present options to our patrons and we let them choose, give them an option of which of about 4 or 5 heroes we'll cover next. We didn't do that in this case, and the main reason we didn't do that in this case is because as we continue to go deeper and deeper into the lore on the Horus Heresy, as we get into the second half, the march towards Terra and covering the Siege of Terra itself, Malcador is going to become a figure that we talk about a lot more, and he's going to be a lot more interwoven into the story. And it kind of felt like this was a really good place, now that we've covered the opening conflicts of the Heresy, to kind of introduce who he was and introduce some of the things that he did, so you guys have sort of a good foundation as we refer to him and as we talk about his exploits moving forward. Now, as a warning, as we get into this episode, we are definitely in endgame spoiler territory as far as the Siege of Terra goes. A lot of people probably already know a lot of this stuff. A lot of this lore is already, it's being explored, it's being expanded now, but a lot of this lore kind of exists as soon as you pick up the rule book and you pick your faction, whether or not you're doing Space Marines or anything. If you know anything about any of the Imperial factions, you pretty much know these names and whether or not they died or what they may have done. But just as a warning, we are going to be touching here and there on spoiler related content with Malcador. Even if we do spoil something, we're not really going to spoil something because the stories, the histories that they're telling are much deeper and much cooler than what we're going over. We go over a lot of the lore as kind of an overview, a shotgun, if you will. We're covering the lore from a game and how to get into the game perspective. We pull a lot from the books. We pull a lot from the rule books and the codexes and the fiction itself. But the fiction is very awesome and really, really detailed. So there's a lot of stuff to dive into. Don't feel like we've spoiled the story for you, because I'm pretty sure in the rule book it talks about how Malcador died on the Golden Throne. So that shouldn't be a surprise when it comes up.
He does what?
Yeah,
What
I know.
happened?
It's awful, right?
Did he die like Elvis on the Golden Throne?
We'll get there. Like Marky, as he was
Porcelain throne?
as he was rating those food restaurants,
I'm
those
not gonna lie, I
munchies that he
definitely felt
found.
like I've died on a porcelain throne once or twice after eating at the hangnail.
You just paint your toilet gold and you're fine, right? So yeah, before we jump into the actual meat of the episode, you guys, what do you got as what's your opening impression of Malcador the Sigilite?
Well, he dies. I know that now.
Did you just figure that out?
Yeah. I think I asked in one of the earlier episodes, I was like, does this guy die? You're like, we'll get to that.
It's actually still a little so we'll talk about what happens to him, and we talk about him in the past tense because he is dead. I did bunny ears on that. If you join us on Patreon for $3, $6, or $9, you can see our lovely faces and see when I do bunny ears around things.
I was going to say, why did you do finger quotes?
Because it's 40k and because of certain things that happened and because of what Malcador was, I have a really hard time saying a perpetual is ever dead. You know what I mean?
Is he
like
a
any of the
perpetual
characters
too?
that are perpetual,
He's a perpetual too?
yeah.
Oh, he ain't fucking dead then.
Yeah. I mean, it paints a pretty dark picture about his chances of returning, and we'll get into his story as we get into his story. you guys will hear that, but like he's a perpetual, so keep that in the back of your mind. It's kind of one of those like, I know Vulcan's dead, but at the same time, Vulcan left some pretty big clues about how to not have him be dead, and those have been floating around since like 3rd edition. And you know, it's just one of those things. It's one of those things.
Refresh my memory. Who is this guy? For all those people that don't know out there.
Yeah. So before we jump into it, the quick overview, the quick answer to your question is that Malcador the Sigilite was the right hand of the Emperor during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, and even before that, the Unification Wars and all that. And
why does he have such an evil name? Like that just, it rings as like an evil person. Is he bad? Is he a bad guy?
Not, well, possibly. Not really. He's kind of a good guy.
Are you going to get into it where he's originally from on Old Terra? That might.
Yeah, we're going to touch on where they think he's from.
And that'll tell you why he probably sounds evil.
Yeah, wait, he's got a little bit of an ominous name.
He's from the Fromunda Hive.
The Fromunda Hive.
That's a possibility.
Another thing to keep in mind as we get into this is that even though we have gone a certain amount through the heresy, because we're talking about Malcador, we're going to take a step back, talk about his history. So just like when we covered the Emperor himself, or when we covered like, not Gazgul, who did we cover? Gorguts? When we covered Gorguts, we go back into their actual history. So we'll actually take you through Malcador's early history. We'll get you pretty much up to where we are right now with our normal Horus Heresy coverage, and then we'll cover the second half of his life, essentially. The second half of his lore. I shouldn't say life, his lore. But yeah, if you guys are ready, let's jump on in.
Oh, let's get into this. I'm so fascinated about this character.
The water's warm. Come on in. Malcador the Sigilite was a powerful psyker and scholar who served as imperial regent when the emperor was away from Terra, and later when he was engaged in his various projects to further humanity. Malcador was the first Grand Master of Assassins during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, and by decree of the emperor, he also holds the title of Malcador the Hero. By the 31st millennia, so by the time that the Great Crusade started, Malcador was 6,700 years old and could remember the very moment of his birth with a certain degree of clarity.
Whoa.
He knew. He remembered coming out.
What?
Wow.
I mean,
that's a powerful psyker.
Marky's broken.
Marky,
what are you broken on? The fact that he remembers 6,700 years of history, or the fact that he remembers being born? Which part is breaking your brain?
He just who made America like that? He just came out, huh?
Just tore right on out of those.
My God, dude, curtains. That is
like coming from backstage.
That's an experience. There's a reason that normal people don't remember that, right?
It's actually. It's supposed to be really traumatic, being like the whole thing coming out, you know, because you're squeezed down into a position you don't want to be. It's probably relatively painful. Then you're pulled out and smacked by somebody, which probably isn't fun. Then your umbilical cord is cut, which is probably also pretty painful. And then you're no longer in like this nice warm place that you've been in for a real long time. Now, and you're this harsh reality that you have to deal with.
Yeah,
your lungs haven't started to work yet.
So is he taking 6,700 years to try and get back in, or what's the deal?
No. The reason to point out that he remembers the moment of his birth with a certain amount of clarity is to kind of go like that's the power of this dude's mind. Every single moment of 6,700 years he can recall with like photographic clarity.
I was going to say, Chuck, it reminds me of that Rick and Morty episode where I forgot the dad's name. He gets the fortune cookie that says,
what is the dad's name?
Oh, goddamn. It's not Gary. Fuck.
It is Jerry. It's Jerry.
Jerry.
Yeah. Jerry gets the fortune cookie that's like, it says you're gonna fuck your mom. All the fortune cookies. You haven't seen this, Chuck?
I might have, but I can't remember everything.
But like the fortune cookie, like it, whatever you get actually happens at some point, and you're invincible. Like you're immortal until it happens because the fortune has to be fulfilled. It needs to be fulfilled. So the entire episode, dude, it's so bad.
And then it's probably some time machine, time moving bullshit that makes it happen.
Yeah, it's
is it one of the
like
newer
a black
ones?
hole.
It's probably one of the newer ones.
It is.
Yeah, that's why I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen a lot of the new season yet.
Yeah, there's like a black hole, and the mom is like getting like held up against the black hole, and Jerry's like flying through the air, and it like pulls off his pants, the black hole, and he starts flying towards her.
Hits her.
Yeah, dude, it's so bad. It was amazing.
That sounds like Rick and Morty. On top of this magical clarity that he has a perpetual nature. He was also the second most powerful human psyker known, second only to the Emperor. His capabilities allowed him to communicate over long distances, interstellar distances, suggesting he was able to stay in touch with the Emperor during and throughout the majority of the crusade. So Malcador could contact the furthest edges of the expeditionary fleets by his will alone. He didn't have to use astropaths. He didn't have to use relays. He could just go, oh, what's Horus doing right now? And send a message directly to Horus's flagship.
That's fucking awesome.
Whether or not that message was picked up is a completely different story. But if there was another astropath, even on the Eastern Fringe, Malcador would just be like, ring, ring, motherfucker. It's kind of like, the best Stephen King movie ever made. Dreamcatcher.
There was a movie?
Oh my God. You've never seen the movie Dreamcatcher? It is not the best Stephen King.
I don't think I have.
So there's a scene where the dude's subconscious calls him and he like hears a ringing and he picks up a 1911, like a handgun, and he goes, hello? Like he puts it to his ear like it's a phone. It's pretty funny. Perfect. Anyway, I would say the joke only works if you've seen the amazing movie Dreamcatcher. It's fun. It's not good.
Wasn't there another movie like Dark Tower or something like that? That was pretty bad.
Yeah, that does have
not talk
about that one.
In it, though.
Did you say alien ass wheels?
Oh yeah, you have to watch Dreamcatcher. There's alien ass weasels in it.
Oh, ass weasels. I thought you said alien ass wheels.
No, weasels.
That's when we talk
ass
about
weasels
Sourness.
is way worse. That's much worse.
All right, so to get back on topic, the title Sigilite means seal bearer in an ancient Terran language, and it was another measure of the amount of trust and respect the Emperor held for him, as he was one of the few who could speak in the Emperor's name. So he could speak with the authority of the Emperor's name. The title Sigilite is also a reference to the ancient and secretive order Malcador was part of that strived to collect knowledge and artifacts of humanity before and throughout the Age of Strife. They acted to safeguard knowledge that they knew was at risk of being completely lost, all stuff that came out of the age of technology. And Malcador lived in and remembered the golden age, the age of technology. He's not as old as the Emperor. He was not alive in BC. He wasn't alive, 6,700 years before the 31st millennium is, what would that be? That would be the
math.
24, that'd be like the 23rd millennium. So he's definitely not nearly, he wouldn't remember our time because he wasn't alive during our time. But he would remember or would have personal firsthand knowledge of the cybernetic revolt, the men of iron, the early empire, the first empire. He would know all of that from firsthand experience. Malcador faithfully served the Emperor as his closest advisor and as a man who encouraged the Emperor to reveal himself during the Unification Wars. He is also credited with founding the Adeptus Administrarum and the Officio Assassinorum, which he secretly served, as we already mentioned. He also created the organizations that would later become the Inquisition and the Grey Knights.
Yeah, so you're saying he really is the second most important person in the Imperium.
100%. 100%. During this time period, he is the second, arguably, he is the most important person in the Imperium for a lot of it. But Malcador is like Gandalf. Malcador is the most important person in the room, but he's not necessarily the leader.
So he's basically what you mean like Gandalf. He's the one that's set. He says the right thing to motivate somebody.
Yes, Malcador is very much Malcador is a lawmaker, a politician, and an administrator at the end of the day. Those are the things that he's really good at. And because he's really good at doing all of that stuff, he kind of knows what's coming like 15 steps before it comes. He knows the acts to take. He knows the reasons behind things. He puts a lot of stuff into place and into motion, which save the Imperium at the moment that the Imperium is its absolute weakest. But his position is that of the Emperor's right hand. Well, another good example, if you want an example that isn't Lord of the Rings, would be Tyrion Lannister in Game of Thrones, the Hand of the King. Malcador is the Hand of the King. that entire Game of Thrones idea that there is somebody who works for the king, who executes the king's orders and speaks with the authority of the king and has the actual pulse of everything that's happening in the kingdom, that's Malcador. But he's doing it at a galactic level, not at a kingdom level.
He's just that one step removed from the top to be able to do all that.
Right. He's the one who has the movement to execute everything.
Yeah.
There's a weird paradox when you're the leader, when you're the emperor, when you're the king, when you're the divine might at the top, your hands are kind of tied.
This motherfucker
doesn't have that problem.
This guy looks like the Emperor from Star Wars.
Malcador definitely has a couple of those. We'll reveal a bit more of it. And as we get deeper into the heresy, there'll be events that we're not going to talk about today that Malcador is involved in or completely executes that come across as like,
what the fuck?
Evil may not be the right word. It's the idea, Machiavellian's idea of the prince. The ends justify the means. Malcador is very much an ends justify the means person.
Yeah, he just looks like he's got that unlimited power energy type of deal, that vibe.
He also always looked very old. He always appeared super old. He never appeared as a young, like, vital man.
So he's the more weazened old guy that everybody's like, he's old, I respect him. Whereas the Emperor's like, he's so beautiful, I'm just going to follow him because he looks like an angel.
Yeah, what is it? This attempt on my life has left me scarred and disfigured.
If you were to cast Henry Cavill as the Emperor, which I think is like kind of an example a lot of people always pick up.
Oh, that's a great example.
I would go with somebody like John
Malkovich.
Ian McClane or
Clint Eastwood.
Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
Yeah, you hit that on the nose. That'd be great.
Or Peter Weller. Any of the older guys that at this point have a tendency to like shave their heads shaved because they're bald. Those would all be Malcador. But yeah, the dude who played Gandalf would be a great Ian McShane. No,
Colin.
Not Ian McShane. Ian McCall. Yeah, would be a good. Yeah,
he'd be great for Malcador. Yeah,
and that's it's that old, like you said, that old wizened figure, that the guy that you respect because you can tell that he's carrying around a weight of years, not necessarily the guy that's like the hottest or the prettiest or the strongest in the room. Speaking of, it was Malcador that delivered the chaplain edict at the Council of Nicaea, which established the role of chaplains in the legions during the Great Crusade. For clarification, although the title seems to suggest some sort of religious intent, chaplains were meant to maintain order and discipline and an adherence to the imperial truth within the legions. They're kind of more like morale officer isn't the right word, but they're like the rules guy. This is the dude, the rules lawyer. Chaplains were rules lawyers. Yeah, it's the best way to look at it. This was a move made to stop the burgeoning faith in the emperor as a god, as well as to assure that the Space Marine librarians set aside their ways and conformed to the council's other edicts. We covered the Council of Nicaea earlier. The other big thing that came out of that, I can't remember the episode we covered it in, but we covered it in one of our Great Crusade episodes. The big thing that came out of the Council of Nicaea, other than the chaplain edict, was the fact that the librarius needed to disassemble itself. The librarians could no longer practice. Something that will be undone during the Heresy, but during the Heresy. During the Heresy. Fucking got me. The Heresy. But at this point during all of this, librarians are supposed to set aside their powers, they're supposed to pick up their bolters, and they're supposed to be just normal run-of-the-mill battle brothers again. As the events of the Horus Heresy came to a head, Malcador willingly took the Emperor's place on the Golden Throne, and he used his psychic abilities to hold back the Warp Spawn and Neverborn, which clamored at the gates of Terra's Webway portal, which the Emperor had rebuilt beneath the Imperial Palace. This sacrifice allowed the Emperor to face the arch-traitor Horus aboard his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, a conflict which saw Horus defeated and killed along with the Emperor being mortally wounded. When the mortally wounded Emperor was brought back to the throne room of Terra, Malcador used the last of his psychic reserve to keep the Emperor alive. With this energy, the Emperor was able to speak with Rogel Dorn, giving his son his last orders, along with surviving long enough to be reinterred within the Golden Throne himself. When Malcador was removed from the throne, his body was spent and he crumbled into ash. It was this act that earned him the title Malcador the hero.
So he just turned to ash.
At the end of everything, his body essentially dissipated.
Well, I mean, he's old, so
I don't know.
Doesn't
Perpetual.
mean he can't. He's still a perpetual. My main argument is that he is a listed perpetual, and perpetuals
come back.
Can choose to die, but often come back.
He's just like, fucking kill me.
It'd actually be kind of interesting, like, oh my god. Okay, tinfoil hat moment. So there's a bunch of stuff happening right now in the Dan Abnett verse.
I haven't read any of it.
A lot of Dan Abnett stuff kind of becomes lore. He's kind of one of the writers. He's one of the very well-respected writers in the play. He's probably, in my opinion, he's the most well-respected because I respect him the most. But well,
Never
him and Gav Thorpe. We talk about him all the time.
I know.
So he's doing this whole thing where there's this figure named the King in Yellow, which is loosely based on the King in Yellow as far as historical literature goes in the real world. The idea of this like weird enigmatic force and nobody really knows what it is. And we kind of think we know who it is. And I didn't even think about this right now, but it would be fucking awesome if it's revealed that the King in Yellow is actually Malcador and he's just been alive this entire fucking time. He just reincarnated somewhere else to watch the galaxy. And now in the 42nd or 43rd millennium, he's like, all right, I'll let you guys try to figure out on your own. I let Reboot come back to try to fucking fix it. I'm tired of your shit. And he just goes on like an anti-crusade against the fucking Imperium to fix it. How badass would that be?
That would be crazy.
We get 20 new legions of Space Marines.
Oh God.
Well,
and their entire point is to wipe out the entire galaxy of the original. Yeah, you're right. You might not because it might be some of that Malcador has said.
It might be some of the original Primarchs that have finger quotes disappeared.
Yeah, they come back with him. That would be dope. Anyway,
Dorn comes back and goes, you know what? I finally get to bitch slap Gilman.
No shit, right? I kind of want to do an episode on the Dorian Heritage. Well, I kind of want to like. Maybe when we're in our like 4th or 5th season and we're starting to play with the weirder, more esoteric stuff because we've done all the faction breakdowns and we've kind of covered all the major battles that we want to talk about. Okay, so like maybe the 40th season.
I was going to say I said like 5 years,
but you know, like 10 years from now, it'd be fun to take a side jaunt into the Dorian Heresy. That'd be dope. There's this whole fan theory. There's this whole alternate reality fan theory that exists, listeners, that essentially posits if Horus had stayed loyal but Dorn fell, what would have changed? And it gives a whole other list of...
The heresy would have won.
The heresy would have won. It gives a whole other list of traitor Primarchs. It talks about, I think the location of the Eye of Terror even changes, like a bunch of shit changes. It's cool. It'd be a cool fan theory to do if we would decide to do a side jaunt one day. That'd be dope. Anyway, to get into Malcador's history. During the Emperor's conquest of Old Earth late in the 30th millennium, he gathered many trusted advisors and officers to his flag. For the most part, these men had been members of the nobility or warriors of renown from the Emperor's own fledgling Space Marine legions. Again, here is a case where the Space Marine legions are talked about having existed before the unification of Terra and before the existence of the Primarchs. I know I stress that a lot, but I like pointing it out. Malcador was the exception to this. Malcador was just a man. As a member of the ancient order of the Sigilites, Malcador had the bearing of a priest, scholar, or lore master. Although he looked as if he would have been more at home among the books and the artifacts his order had gathered during the coming of the Age of Strife and throughout it. Malcador was no stranger to the field of battle and had often been right at the Emperor's side, using his extremely powerful psychic abilities to aid in combat. Malcador and the Emperor had met when the Emperor was nothing more than another techno-barbarian warlord, and it was Malcador who had suggested that he take on the title of Emperor of Mankind and continue his quest to unify the entire planet into Terra. On top of this, it was the Sigilite Order's ancient fortress in the Himalayan mountains that would eventually become the foundation of the Imperial Palace. Horus is said to have uncovered the true identity of Malcador, telling his brother Primarch, Jakatai Khan, the best Primarch, of the Sigilites' origins sometime before the heresy began. Horus revealed to the Khan that Malcador's true name was Barham al-Kador, and as a perpetual, he had been known as a cursed wanderer, the last and greatest of the technomages of old Earth. Braham Malcador and the Sigilites were said to have committed the greatest atrocities of old night, memories that the Emperor and Malcador himself had later erased from those who may have remembered and history. So there are forgotten ancient atrocities during old night that may or may not have been Malcador's fault under his born name.
When was the Old Night before?
Old Night was kind of like how the golden age of technology and the dark age of technology are the same thing depending on who's talking about it.
Okay.
This is a good question. I want to give you a more official answer.
Yeah, so this is one of those things where you were saying that he's done some shady stuff.
He did some shady stuff. Age of Strife is also referred to often as Old Night.
Okay.
And Old Night being like nighttime, not as in like a dude in armor.
Yeah. So essentially, during the Age of Strife, he did some shady shit to get humanity through it. Essentially, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. This is where you say like the ends justify the means kind of deal.
Yeah. Like it would not have been out of hand for the Sigilites to wipe out and massacre an entire people to save like an archive of books. And when I say an entire people, I mean like...
Does that Grey Knight have plasma on his arm? That a thing?
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, their nemesis weapons are crazy.
No, he's got instead of a storm bolter, a storm plasma gun.
Now they call them they used to call them nemesis weapons. There were nemesis plasma guns. There were nemesis
like a 30K thing.
No, it's just a thing that Grey Knights had. Like, what's a good example?
A nemesis force weapon.
They had like
yeah.
a nemesis glaive, a nemesis bolter, nemesis bolter rounds, nemesis plasma gauntlet. It's just one of those things that they attach to everything. But a nemesis weapon is essentially like, it's beefed up. When they're guns, they were usually twin linked, and they're just a little bit extra beefy against demons.
They're just better.
What do they call them? Their Hellfire rounds or whatever the Death Watch have? It's kind of like that.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Dragon's Breath rounds?
It's Hellfire. They have Hellfire, Dragon. What the hell is it? Dragon bolts, and one other one.
Got you.
They got a couple. I should probably know it. Shame on me.
So whatever the truths of his origin may have been, Malcador... So the point that I was making. So the Sigilites would have gone in and just massacred like 400,000 people to save like a library of books. And sure, it would have been barbarians or wastelanders or techno-barbarian, whatever word you want to apply to it, but the word that would have been used as far as imperial histories go. But realistically, it could have just been people that just happened to be living in this area, and they would murder everything. Think about all of the stories that we've talked about on the podcast to this date that deal with the Grey Knights, and the fact that the Grey Knights will just absolutely fucking murder everyone to keep a secret.
This is one of those things.
That comes from Malcador.
That's from
the
Malcador,
thing that he would do. Yeah. That's from his playbook.
So in the novels and the short stories and stuff, then for the heresy, when they're talking about the archaeological digs, is that him running that too? Like from a distance, it's like his people are the ones in charge.
Oh yeah, 100%. So when the Order of the Remembrancers was canceled by Malcador, it was canceled because Malcador didn't want eyes on both sides of the heresy. He essentially didn't want the traitors to get as much coverage and as much recognition as the loyalists. And the Emperor agreed with them. They didn't want the optics became bad. It was no longer a good story to tell. They wanted to kind of hide it. There's less coverage of a civil war than there is of a world war, because a world war, you can paint yourself as the good guy really easily, as into where a civil war, you're essentially like, no, we're both shit heels. They didn't want to get into that like miasma of bullshit, essentially. But Malcador at the same time took a lot of those remembrancers and like redistributed them towards things that he needed answered. And he manipulated if Horus can be seen as playing regicide against the Imperium, the person sitting at the regicide board on the Imperium side is Malcador. It's not the Emperor, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
The Emperor, through a lot of the heresy, is locked in his basement playing with his shop vac. And we'll talk about that in a minute.
Cleaning my room.
I'm cleaning my room. What was that?
Told
Duffy?
you to knock.
Yeah.
Officer Duffy.
Officer Duffy. Just clean my room.
And
Told you to knock.
I don't mean to downplay the Emperor, but the Emperor, by lore, at that point in history, has specifically removed himself from the board to work on another project. And yes, that project would have been massive for the humanity if it had worked, but the Emperor left, in a lot of ways, humanity at the worst time to go off and do a private project, and caused a lot of problems, possibly on purpose because he knew it was coming and knew that he had to, but that gets into weird paradox and time manipulation crap.
Weird tinfoil hat stuff.
Whatever the truth of Malcador's origins may have been, he had always favored the simple hooded robes that are known now as being those of an administratum worker, or somebody who would have been recognized as a Terran administrator. And he had worked a little to dispel any rumors that swirled around his mystique. All of this stuff that's said about him, we'll murder hundreds of thousands for a book, whatever it was, we'll punt a baby into a ceiling fan for an extra margarita. Whatever the rumor is about Malcador, he just wouldn't fight it. He would do that. There's that character. I'm trying to think of like a good movie that has it in it, but there's always that character that's like Aragorn would be a good example. They're in the prancing pony and everybody's telling stories about the dark and dangerous stranger in the corner, and instead of like,
I'm not like that.
Yeah, trying to look like he's not like that, Aragorn's like, yeah, that's me. I'm dark and mysterious. Like, he doesn't do anything to fight that.
Better to look foul and feel fair than look fair and feel foul.
Exactly. Malcador is a better to be feared than loved sort of individual. Some suggest that he was the first psyker to have ever undergone the ritual of soul binding. This is a rite that binds a sufficiently powerful psyker to a portion of the Emperor's power, boosting their potency and willpower while also protecting them from the warp. I don't believe this, by the way. I think this is like the most ridiculous of the this is Malcador things. I think Malcador was just as powerful as everybody thought he was and had nothing to do with the Emperor. I don't
just
think
giving the Emperor more
made
credit
him more
for
powerful.
Yeah.
Other stories even suggested that Malcador was some distant relation to the Emperor himself, so like a third or second cousin or something like that.
Again, following those same things, just giving him more credit than what he's due.
Wow.
Regardless of what the truth may be, it is undeniable that Malcador was held in high regard by the Emperor and was one of his wisest and oldest confidants. So I don't think that you have to be related to the Emperor to be powerful. I think
like
is
the
more
whole
the
Star
point.
Wars Skywalker kind of thing.
Yeah, you don't have to be from the Skywalker family to be a hero. Like, you can just be somebody else. And I don't like it when universes do. I understand why in the rumor mill of Terra, it makes sense that everybody would be like, oh, obviously they're related to each other because they're both really powerful. That kind of just, it makes sense. But me saying I don't think the Emperor and Malcador were related is not me tossing shade at the Emperor. I just don't think it's likely that these two figures were related. I think there's...
Fuck the Emperor.
Fuck the Emperor. Wow. I think there are a bunch of perpetuals.
There's probably perpetuals because the Emperor did do a lot of fucking, so...
Well, we also know that the reason that the Emperor is the most powerful of perpetuals is because 12 perpetuals, at least allegedly, all sacrifice themselves to be reincarnated in one body, which means, in my opinion, that the perpetual gene doesn't come from one family. The perpetual gene was in all families at some point. If you want to take an example from biblical literature, they talk about the 12 tribes of Egypt, the 12 tribes of the Hebrews that everyone is essentially descended from. So say that each one of those tribes had a perpetual in it, or well, I think I could be getting my biblical history wrong or my biblical stories wrong. But there's 12 tribes of Egypt, and then there's the Gentiles. There's the people who aren't part of the tribes of Egypt, who aren't part of the Hebrew tribes. So say there were like 70 tribes. Every single one of the 70 tribes has one family that are perpetuals. So, and everyone is descended from those 70 tribes or whatever. So I don't think saying all perpetuals come from one group of people makes any sense. I feel like it would be one of those, just like we see psychers in the 40k universe being born fucking everywhere. Psychers don't all come from one planet. So it doesn't make sense that all psychers are related through blood relation. And of course, technically everyone on Terra would be related to each other if you went back far enough. Technically everybody in the universe is related if you go back far enough. But I think the idea of like familial connection here is supposed to be like, oh yeah, Malcador was his second cousin on his mother's side or something. I think it's supposed to be that. It's not supposed to be like, 20,000 years ago, Ukgog and Ruff made powwow, and they had 13 children. And 1,500 generations later, separated by 1,500 generations, you had the Emperor born here and Malcador born there. I don't think that's what people mean when they say they're related. I think they mean that, like...
I get it. You mean it like Spaceballs, you know. Your brother's sister's cousin's twice removed roommate.
Yeah. I think what they mean is that the Emperor's great-great-grandfather and Malcador's great-great-grandfather are the same person. And I don't think that makes any sense. Anyway, not to throw shade at the Emperor, although I do a lot of that. So Malcador was definitely a man who had earned his place at the Emperor's side, commanding the respect from even the Primarchs themselves. So this was a guy that the Primarchs looked up to because, again... And this makes a lot of sense. As you're brought into this situation, you're introduced to your dad, and you're introduced essentially to like your uncle in a way, your spiritual uncle, as I just made a huge argument about how they weren't blood relatives. But that whole idea of like, oh yeah, this is Uncle Malcador, you know, just call him, you know, it's that respect thing. Kind of like how we all call Chuck Uncle Chuck. I don't think any of us have ever called Chuck Uncle Chuck.
No,
my son does.
Yeah. I mean, there you go. There's the example right there. I'm the old weazened man right there.
The weazened man. I like that you don't say wizened. You say weazened. I like it. How do you pronounce Malcador? You got me earlier. I said the same thing. Maclador. I'm like, yeah, good old Maclador. I'm like, God damn it, that was a Chuckism.
That was Marky that said that. I said Malcador.
Oh, was it? What? All right. It's the Atreides, too. It's not
Malkovich.
The Astartes.
I said Malkovich.
That's right. Malkovich. So Malcador becomes the administrator of the Imperial Palace after Old Earth had been conquered and had become officially Terra. Throughout the Great Crusade, his power and influence would only grow as he became the overseer of the Imperial Tithe and held the highest seat on the Council of Terra. As we mentioned, he even went on to found the Administratum. So the entire workings of the bureaucracy of the Imperium go back to Malcador and Malcador's efforts. As the Primarchs were rediscovered, his time was increasingly consumed by the need to fill the expanding bureaucratic roles the Emperor could no longer handle. The further out the Emperor got, the bigger the Greater Crusade got, the more work Malcador had to do back to just keep the Imperium running. An example of this is that when Leman Russ, the second Primarch to be rediscovered by the Emperor, was discovered, he came from Fenris, which was a pre-industrial world. Russ had no idea and no tools to adjust to a technologically advanced culture or society that was the Imperium. And it actually ended up being Malcador who served as his tutor. Russ was sent to Terra to study under Malcador to learn how to not be a crazy person who was like, oh my God, there's ghosts. Why do you have pocket ghosts? Oh no, like... Every joke you can think of. Ninja Turtles 3, when they go back to like ancient Japan and they convince the like shogun, they're like, oh yeah, we have witches trapped in our tiny box that play music for us, because they're like trying to describe what a Walkman is. Like it's that whole idea. Like, that was what Russ was doing. He's like, why do you have pocket witches? Why is this that? Everything was magic, and Russ had to be essentially tutored and shown, no, this is technology. This is how a technological advanced society works. Leman Russ was it. He was the only one from a pre-industrial barbaric planet. A lot of them came from barbaric planets. However, in most cases, something approaching a bolter existed. In Leman Russ's case, it was like iron axes and swords were the pinnacle of technology when Russ was found on Fenris.
The difference between barbarians and techno-barbarians, I'm assuming.
Yeah, exactly. Malcador served as his tutor, and obviously all of this like extra attention between the two of them formed a bond that was pretty strong throughout their entire relationship. Malcador's words also held the weight of law, and his insights helped many of the Imperium's greatest heroes. So if he said it was a law, if he put it into decree, if it didn't become a law, in that moment, it was treated as law. And all of the Imperium's greatest heroes, and by that we pretty much are referring to the Primarchs, if they had something they needed to talk about and they needed a counselor, they would turn to Malcador, at least up to a certain point. Events happen soon that change that. And this is because Malcador had an encyclopedic knowledge of humanity's past, being that he had lived through much of it, at least much of that mattered. And he was a living link to the golden age of technology. He had the most important job, or the most important job that he kind of inhabited, other than being this link to the golden age of technology and humanity's good past, was to remind the Emperor what had happened before and why all of humanity's past empires had failed. So Malcador had this knowledge of what had happened during the golden age of technology, why that had led to a downfall, and could essentially advise the Emperor on how to avoid these pitfalls. This is what happened to the, for lack of a better name, the Assyrian Empire, which was very, very much earlier in history. But again, just as needing a name, because they did these things, this fell. This is what led to the cybernetic revolt. So we need to make sure that we don't go down this path again. Malcador had this knowledge. He had seen these things firsthand, and he could kind of help. He could get an idea from the Emperor of where the Emperor wanted to go, and then he could advise the Emperor how not to make those same mistakes again. And a lot of that wasn't that the Emperor necessarily needed the knowledge. It was more that Malcador knew when to tell the Emperor, hey, wait a second, remember how this happened in the past. Let's not do that again. Because the Emperor, in a lot of cases, as we covered when we talked about him in the Primarch Project, the Emperor would get wild ideas and wild hairs up his ass, and he would just want to jump and go. And it required that Gandalf figure again to kind of reel him in, rein him in, and point him in a more constructive direction. A lot of times you talk about executors and wizards, and this actually works really well. The wizard personality and the relationship between Malcador and the Emperor is the Emperor. The Emperor is the ideas man. He's got all these crazy ideas. He wants to go lightning fast. The executor, the voice of reason, the person who can actually put it into place and can kind of reel it in and get it all set, is Malcador. That was their relationship. As a quick aside, Malcador's most prized possessions were 2 ancient Terra paintings, which he had kept displayed in his own personal quarters in the palace. They were the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci and Sunflowers by Vincent van Gogh. That's just to kind of give context for how old and how deep the Sigilite Order's archives were. And this could have been one of those horrible atrocities that they committed. They could have found whatever culture was hiding that shit and just exterminated all of them. Imagine a society just living and protecting the Louvre because they're trying to protect art for all mankind, and the Sigilites are like, no, we're better at protecting shit. We're going to murder you.
So he was kind of like those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it kind of thing.
Very much so.
So then with the, I was asking earlier with the archaeologists and stuff, so that's a trip to me that he's the one in charge of everyone collecting everything. He
continued to do that because that's the order that he came from. That's what they did.
That's a trip to me because the novels I have read during the heresy, there's all this ancient stuff in the Himalayan mountains. They're the ones that found it all. That's crazy.
Yeah, his order, and they collected it. So they essentially, as the cybernetic revolt was starting, which technically happened during the Age of Technology, before the Age of Strife really kicked off, there's a lot of stuff other than human-based and human-started conflicts that happened that made the Age of Strife kick off and happen.
Yeah.
So during the Age of Technology, the bad part of the Age of Technology as the Age of Strife was coming, the Sigilites knew. The Order knew shit was about to hit the fan. And they scoured the entire planet, and in a lot of cases, Mars and the rest of the not galaxy, solar system, for these ancient artifacts and historical records and archives. And just like the Grey Knights, wait, why do you have to murder me? Well, you saw my face. No one can know I was here, so I have to murder you. That was kind of the ideal. They would come into an area, say they visit a fucking archive in the asteroid belt, and there just happens to be 500 miners that live on that asteroid belt, and 2 miners see them. Oh, all 500 people now need to die because somebody saw our face. That was the way that they worked. That was their standard operating procedure. Collect what's important, eliminate everyone around it.
Well, it makes sense, especially
because that's the only way to safeguard humanity's future.
Yeah, I guess think about especially the Age of Strife. Well, if they saw us, they know where we're going back to, so now they know where it's at.
They can follow us. Exactly. We can't risk the knowledge that we tried so hard to safeguard for future generations of humanity being destroyed by the current generation of humanity, because the current generation of humanity is tearing itself apart.
Yeah, they might just grind it up and snort it up their nose.
Or light it on fire. Light the Mona Lisa on fire because they need to burn something to stay warm. Can't have that. Well, you don't have to worry about staying warm if you're dead, so bless.
There you go. You're welcome.
Build a man a fire, keep him warm for a night. Light a man on fire, keep him warm for the rest of his life. The Sigilites had a method to their madness.
They get what's going on.
They got the lay of the land. During the crusade itself, Malcador also acted as the emperor's primary representative when he was unavailable to directly act himself, or when he needed a proxy to precede him. Basically, in some cases, Malcador would deliver the bad news more diplomatically, with the emperor only revealing his presence if shit went south. Another way to look at it is that the emperor used Malcador as the carrot, and the emperor was the stick. The saying, how do you get a donkey to move? Do you dangle a carrot in front of its face, or do you hit it in the ass with the stick? Malcador acted as the carrot. The emperor was the stick.
So between us, basically, Marky would be Malcador because he's so sweet, and I'd be.
Am I though?
And you are. I think I would be more the fork behind.
The fork. I
feel like
that.
I'm like a poison carrot or like a rotten carrot.
Like you're sweet at first, you go down easy, but man, and when you're on that golden throne, it's horrible.
Yeah.
Marky's like carrot kombucha.
Yeah, I'll blow your ass out.
You're okay with it because it's healthy for you and it doesn't taste that awful, but it's kombucha, so it's gonna tear your insides out if you're not used to it.
Howie.
One such event was during the humbling of the Word-Bearers Legion in the ruins of Monarchia. As we covered in the past, about 40 years before the heresy started, stuff finally came to a head with how Logar and his legion had been failing to adhere to the imperial truth and the ways of war. Instead, they had just encouraged those that they had conquered to worship the emperor as a god. During this censure for these actions, Logar backhanded Malcador, sending the old man flying through the air over 20 meters. Not only did Malcador survive, he even managed to regain his feet before he fell completely down. So, imagine he gets backhanded, flies across a courtyard, smashes into a wall, and then instead of falling to his knees in his face, he lands on his feet like a fucking cat. To continue to show off just how much of a badass he was, remember, this is just a normal ass-looking old human. He levitated his walking stick back into his hand before leaning on it again like a fucking legend. And this hit broke bones in his ribs, his legs, and his arms. So he got fucked up when Logar hit him, and he still managed to use his psychic powers and just his pure fuck you to keep on his feet. This was at the point that the emperor revealed himself, and along with the Sigilite's help, forced Logar and the entire legion to its knees in the ashes and rubble of their ruined city. While this move was meant to ensure their compliance, as we've covered, we all pretty much know how this turned out in the end. Later on, Malcador made a statement to the magister and astropath Sybil Nyasta, a friend who lay on his deathbed. To be clear, Malcador claims that this is a lie meant to comfort humanity, but it's an ominous one, and his words can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. It's very hard to figure out what part of what I'm about to say is the lie and what part isn't the lie. That's what I'm trying to get across. He said that part of it was a lie, but was it a lie to reveal it, or was it a lie that he hid it from everyone else? This claim is that he and the emperor had always intended to agitate the Primarchs into a civil war against one another, a conflict meant to purge these Primarchs and their Astartes who were not worthy of leading humanity once the Great Crusade's goals had been accomplished. Much like the Thunder Warriors had been eliminated before them, the goal was that only mortal humans, not genetically engineered superhumans, would inherit the majority of the Imperium. So again, he told this dude on his deathbed, and this is the only person I can track that he told, that this is what he and the Emperor had planned to do. He later said that this was a lie, but whether or not the words he said to the dude were a lie, or whether or not he said them to the dude at all was a lie, is what's a little hazy. So did he lie about having said it, or was the entire statement a lie? However, to finish this out, Had not the Chaos Gods intervened, this is the rest of the conversation, to corrupt half of the Primarchs before the plan that they had to turn the Primarchs against each other had been set into motion, the Emperor's grand design to usher in a new golden age of humanity might have actually happened. So you got a question. Was the lie the comfort to humanity that it wasn't their fault? Or was the lie that they're hiding the truth of what their actions actually were because the heresy intervened before they could fucking do it?
I blame chaos.
I blame chaos. I actually think that this is probably true. Again, we know what happened with the Thunder Warriors. We kind of know what happened with the Terran-born Astartes. It is not out of character of Malcador or the Emperor to look at them turning half the Primarchs against the other half the Primarchs.
Or just weed them out.
Only accepting, the strongest, those who survived, and being like, okay.
I could see that, because the plan was, okay, humanity's done. We've conquered everything. We just would need the defense force or whatever it is to put stuff down. We don't need 20 legions anymore. That's just like the whole thing where there's the 2 legions and mystery of why they're gone.
And that could be part of it too. Maybe that was the actual first pin in that domino, I guess, not pin, that first domino in that chain. And again, we saw the Primarchs do it to their own legions. In an example that we brought up earlier in our Patreon only content, which you can get access to for $3, $6, or $9, Corax hated the 10th company of the Raven Guard so much so that he sent them into battle to get them killed off. And when that didn't work, he fucking exiled them to the Ghoul Stars, which wasn't a good thing. And we will cover their lore in a future episode. But the same thing happened with, Horus did it. We talked about in the atrocity of Istvan 3 in the Dropsite Massacre. Same fucking thing. The sons of Horus, who were Terran-born, were fucking eliminated with prejudice, if they could be. And it happened on each side. The loyalists did it and the traitors did it. It does not at all ring false to me that the Emperor might not have had this plan in place the entire time. Obviously, it didn't go the way he wanted to.
It's a beautiful photo.
Yeah, I know you like it. It's got a strong chin in it.
Fuck yeah, it does. And a flat top.
As so much of this time period seems to, our story now touches back on the linchpin event known as the Triumph of Olenor, the greatest victory humanity had ever had up to that point against a single enemy, with the defeat of the Orcs. One of the reasons we often recall this event is that it not only is when the Emperor revealed his next step in his crusade plans, which was, as we've seen, a bad idea where he kicked a fucking hornet's nest, but it is also one of the last high points any of the Primarchs and their legions can agree upon before the wheels came off. So if you were to talk to all the Primarchs and all the legions, you were to get them all together and be like, hey, let's set this heresy thing aside. What was the last good thing y'all did? They would almost all point to the Olenor Crusade. It was the last time they were all together. It was the last time they all worked together. It was the last time all of humanity was united. And again, 10,000 years later, the last time humanity was united was this Olenor Crusade. It's this big linchpin in 40k history. We're going to get to a couple more linchpins in 40k history, but this is the big first one, is the Triumph of Olenor. Probably the big second one is the Siege of Terra. The wheels fell off as the Emperor declared his intentions to return to Terra, leaving Horus, his most beloved son, as War Master, and he also laid out the future roles of the rest of the Primarchs. They, from this point forward, would serve as humanity's generals and continue to run the Imperium's war machine. But the governance of the Imperium from this point on would fall to men. We mentioned earlier that Malcador took over or ran the Imperial Tithe. This would be the moment that Malcador took over the Imperial Tithe. Before this point, although Malcador was doing a lot of the boring grunt work that the Primarchs and the Legionaries honestly couldn't be bothered to do, the stuff that actually runs a government, actually runs a nation, like how much does bread cost? Who rebuilds freeways? All of the boring stuff Malcador had been handling, but all of the fun stuff, collecting taxes, getting new troops, buying new weapons, had been handled by the Primarchs. This is the moment where that gets taken away from them. You're not reinforcing your own legions anymore. That decision is being made by the bureaucracy. You're not rearmoring. That decision is being made by the bureaucracy. You are not setting the PDF rules or the Imperial Army, because it wasn't the Imperial Guard yet. It was the Imperial Army rules yet. You are not ordering new ships for the Imperial Navy. None of that is your responsibility anymore. Your responsibility is to be generals. That's it. You are no longer handling any of this stuff. And in the Emperor's mind, this was made for a specific reason. We have grown too big. It is too unwieldy to have you leading a war and doing logistics. It doesn't make any sense. We need to set up a logistical force to handle logistics. You need to focus on your job. However, what happens when you have a bunch of hyper-violent teens that are the size of fucking Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and have known nothing other than fighting their entire life? You take something away from them and they just get mad. And that's what happened, as we have talked about for 6 episodes already. It was generally a bad move on the Emperor's part. Maybe shouldn't have done it, man. Because of this, Malcador and the Fabricator General of Mars would be the first 2 named to a newly formed Council of Terra, which would sit opposite the War Council on the scales of humanity. So the Council of Terra and the War Council were meant to work in concert with one another. Again, the Council of Terra is going to handle bureaucracy and logistics. They're going to make sure that you get
what you need,
the food and weapons your army needs to march on. Right. And you're going to do war. Y'all need to talk to each other. And essentially the War Council went, I don't want to. Like, I know I'm kind of talking down on the Primarchs, but a lot of their reactions to this stuff is children. And you know, again, when you're 6 years old and you're 7'2" and you're able to throw a battle axe through an orc at 400 yards, you kind of don't get challenged about not being a dick. So you're kind of just a dick for your entire life. Like, as much as I like some of the Primarchs, like, that's the end goal. Like, you know, super powerful children are bad. I'm just saying. You got to be you have to have your shit pushed in a couple of times to be a normal human.
Be humble.
Yeah. Just be humble for a little bit. The Council of Terra would see to the administrative of the Imperium and would most importantly now take over the responsibilities of the Imperial Tithe. That was a big thing. Malcador, being the Emperor's most trusted advisor, was named the First Lord of the Council and would further lead the Emperor's absence as the Regent of Terra. So he was named the First Lord of the Council, and then the Emperor was like, I know I'm on Terra, but I got shit to do. You're the boss. As we've mentioned earlier, the Fabricated General of Mars, earlier episodes, the Fabricator General of Mars, the Chief Custodian of the Legios Custodes, the leaders of the Astropathica, Navigator Nobilis, and the newly formed Administratum would be awarded other seats on the council. The reason I didn't name them all off is because this is current. The Council of Terra is still filled by whoever the Fabricator General of Mars is, whoever the Regent of Terra is, whoever the Chief Custodian is, whoever is the leader of the Astropathica, whoever is the head of the Navigator Nobilis, and then people from the Administratum. Like, that's how it's done.
How many seats are there
on the High Lords?
Do not tell me there's 13.
I don't think there's 13. I want to say it's 12.
There's 12, and then the throne room, so there's 13. Just like something else we talked about.
The Master of the Adaptus Administratum is one seat. A representation of the Inquisition is the second seat. The Ecclesiarchy is the third seat. So the Inquisition and the Ecclesiarchy were not in this original breakdown. So that's 3 seats. The Fabricator General of the Mechanicum is seat 4. The Ground Provost Marshal of the Adaptus Arbites is 5, which is another one that wouldn't have existed. The Peternoval Envoy of the Navigators is seat 6. The Master of the Astronomicon is seat 7. The Grand Master of the Officio Assassinorum is seat 8. And seat 9 is the Master of the Adaptus Astra Telepathica. And then the Legio Custodes have a seat. So that would be 10 seats.
Just total. 10 seats. Okay, not 13.
Not 13. And I think in modern High Lords of Terra, the Legio Custodes carry seat 10 in case a tie needs to be broken. I don't think they sit on it normally. I think they're only called in when they're the 13th. As far if you want to compare it to the Council of 13 from the Skaven. They're the tiebreaker, yeah. While they all followed these orders, this all bred a lot of resentment in the hearts of the Primarchs and the Astartes of their legions. Many saw an insult in the fact that they were the Emperor's most loyal and staunchest of supporters, but they were being kept out of the structure set up to rule the Imperium. We've talked about this before. Feeling that the Emperor had abandoned them and turned their backs on their efforts, and turned his back on their efforts just to hand over power to petty mortals and nobles and the sycophantic tech priests of Mars. Just to give you an idea of how the Astartes felt about everything. They thought the nobles were all petty idiots, and they thought the tech priests were all sycophants.
Which cracks me
Astartes
up.
think pretty high about themselves.
Well, yeah, but which cracks me up, yeah.
Because without any of that shit, they can't do their goddamn job.
Yeah, because like the Imperial army's there with them. There's nobles fighting it. It's such a gorgeous sight. And then, you know,
and you can see Malcador right next to him.
Malcador's right there. Yeah,
with his flaming phoenix staff.
And what's his face? Sigmund,
yeah. I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be Sigmund. I don't think it's supposed to be. Oh, who's the other one? Who's the one that like Sigmund is the one that replaced? Who's the dude who got exiled? Sigmund kind of takes over for him.
Well, Sigmund is the one that becomes the Black Templars first chapter master.
There was the original first hand of Dorn got he failed at something and kind of got I can't remember. We'll get to it when we get to the Imperial Fists. You should remember. This is all this is legitimately all heresy stuff. I thought it wasn't Sigmund. I thought Sigmund was the dude who took over.
It's Sigmund because he decided after, there's the saint that escapes Istvan. She talks to him and convinces him not to go on the reclamation fleet. And Dorn's pissed because he listened to something religious rather than doing his job a good soldier.
Who took over for Sigmund then?
From where I stopped reading, Sigmund.
This is a different episode, Chuck.
Well, no, I'm just saying, for the longest time, anyway. No, that's probably Sigmund. I don't know. There's a certain point I stopped reading, but that's Sigmund because he's supposed to be the ultimate badass after Dorn.
I can't believe I can't remember the dude's name that I'm trying to think of. As soon as I say it, you'll be like, oh yeah.
I know, it's probably one of the models I want to get.
The usually stoic first captain's resolve was severely shaken. As a result, Sigmund requested that he be allowed to remain by the Primarch's side. Thus, the command of the Retribution fleet passed to the veteran Captain Yonad. That's not who I thought, though.
No, but
there's a dude. His name's on the tip of my tongue. Anyway.
Yeah, that fleet ends up getting rid by the guy that's the first Crimson Fist. That's his nickname. Anyway, sorry, everybody.
Yeah, as Chuck and I try to remember some very specific part of a heresy specific Imperial Fist lore. I'll remember tomorrow I'll be mowing the lawn or something and I'll be like, oh fuck, it was Fred. I can't believe I forgot Fred's name. It's not Fred. But there's somebody shouting at the podcast right now because they know the answer I tried to get to.
It's all good. Hey, I don't claim to be an expert on the lore.
One day we'll get to Imperial Fists and the story I'm trying to remember will come front and center. What came next for the galaxy at large was the continued estrangement of Horus and several of the other Primarchs and many of their legions. While this wasn't completely true, many of both sides of the coming heresy stopped seeing the Great Crusade as an effort to reunite and reforge humanity's lost empire and more as a quest to gather more glories for their own legions. So as a whole, not saying loyalists, not saying future traitors, because this is before that had actually happened. Those last years of the Great Crusade, the 50, 60 years post Olenor of Great Crusade, before the battles of Istvan, before Horus reveals his hand, before anything happens, a lot of the legions just stopped giving a fuck about what the Great Crusade was. They were like, no, screw it. This is about our glory. This is about our battle honors. We're the ones fighting. We're the ones who deserve the credit. They stopped caring about the actual vision, which is it's that second domino. We listed off the first domino earlier. This is that second domino in that chain that's starting to fall. As we've covered in greater detail, Erebus, Corferon, and Logar were working behind the scenes, and the warrior lodges inside the legions started to grow in power. And then Loris fell to a poisoned blade on Davin's moon. Horus then made his pact with the ruinous powers and came back to his legion, actually ordering his senior officers to all become more involved in those warrior lodges, as well as ordering several of the legions most loyal to him to adopt warrior lodges and to have their senior officers participate in them. This furthered Erebus's efforts in corruption and pulling the traitors to his side. Then Horus gathered his allies and began to spread his potential rivals thin across the galaxy before using the Istvan III. Say it, Marky. You're way better at Istvan than I am. Istvan?
Istvan, yeah.
Before using Istvan III's planetary governor Vardas Perel's rebellion as a smokescreen to launch his own agenda. This gets us up to the Istvan III atrocity and the escape of Captain Nathaniel Gobbo on the seized frigate the Eisenstein, which then fled towards Terra, bringing with it not only warnings of Horus's treachery, but dozens of loyalist Astartes of these newly traitorous legions. They were called the 70, by the way, because there were 70 of them. They were 70 loyal Death Guard with Gobbo, plus a scattering of loyalists from the Sons of Horus, the World Eaters, and the Emperor's Children. But the majority that were important are the 70. The full story of the Eisenstein is harrowing and will probably get its own deep dive, but important to Malcador's history, the frigate got lost in the warp for a bit. And when it got spit back out, it was left drifting and stranded hundreds of light years from Terra. However, thankfully, it eventually was rescued by Primarch Rogel Dorn, and he brought it back to Terra. It was then that Gobbo, his 70 fellow Death Guard Astartes, the Remembrancer Euphrates Keeler, and the former Luna Wolves captain Ikton Kors were able to share their news with the Emperor and the Regent of Terra. They were all confined after this to a fortress on Luna under the watch of the Sisters of Silence, while the Emperor determined if they were telling the truth and decided what to do with them from that point on. So even at this point, the Emperor is still like, my boy, my favorite boy would never betray me. Like there's still that denial, if you will. Because I don't feel like it's he doesn't believe it. I very much feel that it's denial. I think the Emperor knows the truth, but he's doing that like, I don't want to believe it.
He's being that parent, like, there's no way. There's no way that
innocent would never do that.
The little innocent boy loves kitty cats.
My innocent baby boy.
He wouldn't pull their tails off.
My kid would never steal.
Kevin will never stop rolling dice to have a 4-hour story that has nothing to do with the game. If you're not here to defend yourself, you're free game.
You're getting rolled, son.
Unlike those dice.
Zing. Remember, it was also during this time that the Emperor continued to work on his secret project under the Imperial Palace, seemingly oblivious to the events on Istvan III, Calth, Cygnus Prime, and Prospero. In fact, of all of the people who worked in the dungeons and the Imperial Palace itself, pretty much only Malcador had full knowledge and full access to the Emperor, and no one dared to ask even Malcador what the Emperor's true purpose was. Malcador had this reputation. Don't fucking talk to him. You want to get backhanded across the room? Ask him a stupid question. He looks busy. Don't talk to him. For his part, Malcador didn't enjoy or even really want the job of Regent of Terra, which kind of made him the best choice for the job in a lot of ways. It's that whole idea that the person who doesn't want the power is probably the person who should be in power. Kind of Malcador to it.
I really don't want to be a billionaire. I don't want it.
It's not how it works. You have to actually
want it at all.
You actually have to not want it, Marky.
I don't want it.
Man, if that could just never happen to me, God.
Has you guys ever heard of Pinocchio? Because like both y'all's noses got a little bit bigger there. I'm just saying. However, he faced ever-increasing obstacles as the Great Crusade came to an end and the heresy started to smolder. The Primarchs openly resented and questioned his authority, even refusing to keep into contact with him. I mentioned earlier that Malcador had the power to fucking call up your astropath, no matter how far away you were. Primarchs just wouldn't answer their astropath. They'd be like, fuck you. They'd leave him on red. The Mechanicum of Mars also started to hound him, repeatedly asking for audiences with the Emperor over the most trivial of issues. And even his own administratum clerks and lower functionaries seemed to need to hear his orders in triplicate before they would act. That whole idea of like bureaucracy, file it 3 times, bury it, lose it for a month, and then I'll do it, started to happen to him by his own people. His own like hirelings. The people who worked directly for him would be like, did you submit that in triplicate yet? Be like, bitch, do it now. Despite all of these distractions, it was clear to Malcador that the dark clouds of the gathering crisis were on their horizon. Warp storms plagued communication, and the light of the Astronomicon was weakening and flickering. Horus had not been in direct contact with him for weeks, and entire regions of the Imperium were now fully cut off and radio silent. All of this meant that he couldn't accurately track the whereabouts of most of the Space Marine legions. Malcador saw the Imperium at its weakest state in its relatively short history, leaving it as easy prey for a determined enemy. And when Malcador learned that the Eisensteins returned to Terra and the dire messages that they had brought, he decided it was time to act and went to Luna. By this time, the Emperor had seen that he would not live on in a capacity enough to take an active role in whatever the aftermath of the heresy would be, nor would chaos be destroyed completely either. The Emperor, after Garo and the 70 and all this information came in, his immediate reaction was to the brig. But then it's that post-nut clarity again, where as soon as he has that reaction, that harsh reaction, sends them all away because he doesn't want to believe the truth. He literally he took a sip of coffee. He kind of looked at the closed door. He could hear the footsteps fading as these guards are taking these people to Luna to lock him up. And he probably went, fuck, they're right. And he called Malcador. He was like, look, whatever happens, I'm probably not going to survive, and we're not going to actively destroy chaos.
Yeah, he took the old right hand of the Emperor thing very literally right there.
Because post-nut clarity? Was that a post-nut clarity?
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. The Astartes had also proved to not be above the potential of corruption, something the Emperor had hoped for. So when he made the Astartes legions, he hoped that they would be incorruptible by chaos. That, as we have seen, that ship sailed.
What's the saying? Hope in one hand, shit in the other.
Yeah, right. See which one comes true, or see which one smells more.
Fills up first. Yeah,
fills up first. That's what it was. It was time to set and plan actions that would win a wider victory from the ashes of personal defeat. So the Emperor at this point has decided, I'm probably not going to live through this, at least in a way that makes me functional. Maybe I'll live, but I'm going to look like Malcador at the end. Maybe that was in his mind. He knew
it's fucked up.
Yeah, he knew that he wasn't going to be leading from the front anymore, and that he had to put stuff that he and Malcador had to take action now to make sure that some future for humanity was assured. As the closest of his advisors, servants, and friends, the Emperor had set another task to Malcador. The order was to scour the galaxy for those who are worthy to help save humanity's future, a task that Horus's growing insurrection was greatly disrupting, as more and more of the galaxy came into anarchy and different layers of open revolt. Malcador started almost immediately, but this is also as, even if Horus and his forces are in the Istvan system, as Marky so eloquently pronounces, a lot of the other systems that are loyal to Horus know of what's going on and are either letting riots and anarchy spread on their planets and being like, I don't know what to do, or they are openly revolting already.
So shit's starting.
There's nothing to track it to Horus yet. Nathaniel Garrow and the dudes in prison on Luna know that's what's going on. The Emperor and Malcador know what's going on. Maybe Rogel has an idea of what's going on. The rest of the galaxy is in the dark, essentially.
Shit's fucked up.
It's difficult to operate as a spy master when that's happening. And that's what Malcador is. He's an assassin and a spy master.
Which is why in that one photo he had a mask.
He's Nick Fury.
Yes, Nick Fury. There's another great example.
That is great, but not the Nick Fury on the TV show. He's the old school Nick Fury.
The Nick Fury that only showed up for 5 minutes at the end of an episode. At the post-credit scene. That's Malcador. In a lot of ways. Very legitimately, the post-credit Nick Fury. Not a lot's known about Malcador. Not enough is recorded about him. He just shows up, says the right thing at the right time, gathers the right people, and dips.
As I was going to say, my opinion of what's out there now, it's not the new TV show Nick Fury. It's, like you said, the old Nick Fury.
I haven't seen the new TV show. Now I want to watch it so I can be mad.
It's like one of those things where it's like a magician never reveals his tricks, and it revealed all of Nick Fury's tricks, and now he's lame.
One of the biggest things that I've heard people bitch about is the fact that he lost his eye to a cat. Everybody's like, that's a letdown. I'm like, that's funny.
Which is why it's a letdown.
I guess, but it's still funny. So this eventually brought Malcador to Luna, where he met with Captain Garo, Captain Oruz, and the Sisters of Silence, and Sister of Silence, not all of them, just one, Amadrea Keel. He spoke of the Emperor's need for their services. They would become the foundation of an organization outside the boundaries of the existing imperial bureaucratic structure, one which would utilize, and here we go with the quote, men and women of an inquisitive nature, hunters who might seek the witch, the traitor, the mutant, the Xenos.
My boys.
Under the Sigilite's own seal, which is the future symbol of the Inquisition. So that's where the eye in the Inquisition comes from. The eye with the skull in it was Malcador the Sigilite's personal symbol. Garo is tasked with assembling 7 other loyalist Astartes from among both loyalist and traitor legions. Astartes who were completely and unquestionably devoted to the Emperor. These Space Marines would become known as the Knights Errant. They would eventually form the core of what will become the Grey Knights chapter of Astartes, the chamber militant of the Inquisition's Ordo Malleus. Captain Icatan Cures was retained to act as Malcador's hand in investigations much closer to Terra and the Palace, including the case of Solomon Voss. With these actions, the Inquisition was born out of the very fires of betrayal.
So he kept the half-herd to be his hand, right? That's the Luna Wolf captain, right? The half-herd?
Captain Icatan Cures, I believe, was he half-herd?
Was he the half-herd one from the Luna Wolves, the Terror-born, that they were just, he's just going to stay with us? Because he doesn't say anything, just does what he's told?
Possibly.
Oh, man, if that's the case, that's badass. He got to come home and prove a point.
So, no, he is not the Terran-born guy you're thinking of. He's actually one of the oldest of the native Chthonians. He's one of the loyalists from Chthоnia. He's one of the, arch traitors in Horus's eyes.
Gotcha. Still, though, that's
because he's from Horus's planet and he didn't follow him.
Oh, that's even better.
He's double traitor.
Double agent. Does that make me a normal agent? That makes you a double triple agent. I can't remember what skit that was. It was either Saturday Night Live or Mad TV.
Sounds like Archer.
It was Archer. So Solomon Voss was one of the preeminent founding members of the Order of Remembrancers. He initially served the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet under Horus's command and even tried to get some insight from the Legion on the reasons behind their treasonous actions. But the Order of Remembrancers was canceled before he could act, at least legally. He tried anyway and was eventually captured and imprisoned on Saturn's moon Titan. We'll get deeper into all of this later on in an episode dedicated to the Remembrancers. Solomon Voss, essentially, he's a very, very big character in the Crusade books, the early set of the Horus Heresy books. He and Euphrates Keeler are talked about a lot. Before he was a Remembrancer, he was an orator, so he was one of the guys that they are Interator, one of the dudes that they sent down to be like, the Emperor is the best, and give the Emperors the best speeches. And then he became one of the founding members of the Order of Remembrancers. When everything fell apart and Malcador and the Emperor disbanded the Order of Remembrancers, Voss and a couple of other Remembrancers tried to sneak to the Istavan system to document the atrocities that were happening and find out what was going on. And at that point, they were captured by, I believe, the Imperial Fists, and they were taken to Saturn's moon, Titan. And this is before Saturn's moon, Titan, has become the home of the Grey Knights. The Grey Knights are coming, but they're not established yet. At this point, Titan is just a prison planet. He is later released by Rogol Dorn during the Siege of Terra, and Rogol Dorn reinstates him and the Remembrancer Order because Rogol realizes after Malcador and the Emperor are essentially, they're not dead, they're still on the field, but they've been effectively removed from play. They're no longer acting or capable of acting because they've got their own shit that they need to deal with. Rogol realizes if we don't chronicle the Siege of Terra and the actions of Horus, it's going to be forgotten and history is doomed to repeat itself, which was the whole reason that the Order of Remembrancers were set up anyway. So this whole we're trying to whitewash, or not whitewash. No, I think that's how you use the term whitewash. We're trying to whitewash our history by not remembering it that happened during the heresy. Rogol at a certain point is like, this is dumb. Why are we doing this? This is going to bite us in the ass.
Who figured that out again?
The best boy in the entire world, Jakatai Khan.
Wow!
And then he told Rogel what to do. What? Did you not expect that? So speaking of, next Malcador met with the Primarch Rogel Dorn, who was having a hard time coming to grips with Horus's treachery. Rogel and Horus had been relatively close, and Rogel had been one of the people who actually believed in and followed Horus pretty to the letter. However, it was obvious that the civil war would eventually come to Terra, and the Imperial Palace needed to be fortified. Rogel Dorn and his legion had been personally requested by the Emperor to undertake this action, and it was one that Rogel felt he was doomed to fail. He essentially kind of thought that the fact that he had been a champion for Horus before Horus had fallen meant that there was something wrong with him. Rogel is a very self-reflected, stoic person, and the fact that he messed this thing up shook him to his core. And Malcador actually had to kind of help Dorn through it. He had to kind of be his therapist. And no, you're cool. People make decisions that have nothing to do with you. This is not your fault. This is 100% Horus's fault. Stop beating yourself up. He had to kind of have that pep talk with Dorn to bring him back and help him kind of uncover and overcome those fears so that he could become the force that was needed to protect Terra. Because the Emperor and Malcador knew Rogel Dorn is the person for this job. It was just that moment of how the fuck could I have fucked up my judgment so much? I am not the right person. And it took, that coach. And it's just another side of Malcador. Malcador's kind of got to be the coach too. He's kind of got to fill this other role.
It took that seasoned uncle to embrace him and guide him on his way. To make
statements at Thanksgiving that make everybody else go, "Why is Uncle here?"
Exactly.
Uncle saying things that you can't say on TV at the Thanksgiving table. Malcador also used his influences as the secret Grandmaster of Assassins to make several assassination attempts on Horus. While several assassins and the first official execution force, this is an ad hoc force of assassins pulled from every temple, came close to success, none succeeded. By the way, and Hammer and Bolter, that first episode, that's an execution force. When they fucking kill the Inquisitor.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was badass. When she's like, "Oh, you don't understand. I'm not here to kill you. I'm here to keep you in this room." I was like, oh, fuck. The Emperor eventually called off these early attempts, still believing at this point that he could save his favorite son. So again, there's this whole idea, Horus is the Emperor's favorite. Horus doesn't think that his boy is lost. He thinks that he's savable. Malcador also worked with Primarch Leman Russ and the Knights Errant later on in the heresy to make another attempt to assassinate Horus on the world of Molech. Malcador had selected Graviel Loken, only recently recovered from his insanity and now a Knight Errant, to command the mission, but this also ultimately failed. There is a fucking amazing talk between Horus and Graviel at this point that is just it's fucking eerie. And that dude, that voice actor that does Gazgul, that you may or may not have seen, the British voice actor who does he gets really into it and he's like, "Worlds were burning my boot prints." He does that really great fucking voice.
And gravelly, yeah.
He's done the entire conversation between Horus and Garviel as in this, in that same, because he's a voice actor. I found it 2 days ago randomly. It's fucking good. I was like, oh, this is badass. Hearing it read out by a voice actor, not by a audiobook reader, was just oh, shivers and tingles. It's an impactful conversation. Let's put it that
I'm sure.
During a war council between Primarch Rogel Dorn, Sanguinius, Leman Russ, and Jakatai Khan, Malcador appealed to have Russ and his Space Wolves Legion stay on Terra and be part of its defenses. However, the Wolf King wished to go and face Horus directly before his forces came to the throne world. During a regicide match between the two, later on, Malcador shares his fondness of Russ and expresses his understanding of Russ's need to challenge Horus directly. So there's this kind of I just wanted to point out this kind of uncle-nephew relationship that Russ and Malcador have, where Malcador is I really think you should be here. I really think you need to support your brothers and defend Terra. this is going to be where the final battle happens. This is where you're needed the most. And Russ is like, I can't. I have to go fight him. I have to. And Malcador is like, I understand. I just had to appeal to you one last time. So they have this war council. And even though Rogel doesn't really want Russ to go, Rogel also understands, I can't control the wolf. He's going to do what he's going to do. And maybe it's better to have him going out there and fucking shit up than having him pace on Terra and cause distraction. So there's like, it's just there's these very interesting, like, brotherly interactions, and like, it's this weird family. It really is. As much as I made the argument earlier that there's no relation, Malcador is the adopted uncle, and there's this weird family dynamic kind of between the Emperor, the Primarchs, and Malcador, as to where the Emperor is really cold to his sons, except for Horus in a lot of cases. Malcador is very much the like, no, I understand. Just as we pointed out with Rogel Dorn, there's some conversations with Lehman, there's some conversations with Sanguinius, and a couple of others. Malcador is always kind of this like more kindly figure to them. One of the exceptions is actually Jakatai Khan, because Jakatai Khan is like, fuck you, old man, and the old man is like, fuck you, Jakatai, and then they like, Dylan, you son of the bitch, hand slap, high five. Like, they openly hate each other, and they just don't talk a lot. Like, but it's that sort of like little relationships that are really interesting.
Well, I could get the whole thing too with like Russ wanting to go out there, because that's what his legion is geared for, is the head on. Not
Rogel understood that.
Yeah.
Dorn understands that in a lot of ways. He understands, again, more of it has to do with like, if I keep Lehman here, he's going to drive me nuts. Then it's a good idea. It's another just great conversation in one of the books. It's one of those things where like, even if you don't read the books, if you can look up and find these conversations and just read the dialogues, they're pretty cool, and they reveal a lot about the Primarchs. As the heresy continued to worsen, Malcador found himself infected with a despair and growing feeling of being overwhelmed. Again, he's just a man. He had spent his life, since their meeting, utterly devoted to the Emperor and his vision. But no matter how many battlefields he had served on or seen, he felt that he was no warrior. His skills lay in lawmaking and administration, and despite his extremely potent psychic abilities, he felt ever more disconnected from his friend the Emperor. One part of it is that the Emperor is withdrawing further and further into his project. Another part of it is that Malcador just doesn't see his worth as a battlefield commander. He doesn't think that he is capable of making a decision that will change the outcome of war, regardless of the fact that Malcador has literally been on the front lines of some of the bloodiest fucking battles, doing heavy lifting with his psychic abilities. Every single time that happened, he was next to the Emperor, and the Emperor is the general. The Emperor is Alexander the Great. With the absence of Alexander the Great, Alexander the Great's most potent psychic weapon just doesn't feel like he's up to the task. And it's another part of Malcador is like, he's just a dude. He's literally just a flawed human. He could not comprehend how an Astartes, let alone 4 Primarchs and their entire legions, could turn on the Emperor. It's just these very human feelings, these very human reactions to this disaster happening around him.
I mean, he knows about the forces of chaos, right?
He knew. But again, the Emperor had designed it, Malcador being one of the only people that knew. The Emperor had essentially designed, in a lot of ways, the Primarchs and the Astartes not to fall to chaos. So not only do you have something that was supposed to be in their design failed, you then have and failed enough that they're betraying their father. So it's like that 1-2 punch. If he had just gotten hit once, he would have been okay.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it from Horus's perspective, but a lot of the other Primarchs, I mean, I feel like you can kind of see it coming. But again, they don't have all the information, right?
Horus isn't Horus. Horus is possessed.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Horus is, we don't really outright talk about it a lot when we talk about, everybody is like, well, Horus is a piece of shit. Like, that's the general consensus of 40k players. A lot of people don't understand that Horus fucking died on Davin. I mean, he's there, but it's that whole idea. It's the idea of your paladin dies in a D&D campaign, and then when your paladin is dead, he ends up in this weird spiritual plane, and a dark entity gives him an option. And the option is, I'll resurrect you, but you now work for me. And the paladin takes it because the paladin's like, I need to get back. I need to get back to my work of protecting humanity and everything. And then your DM hands you the character sheet for a warlock. who is dedicated to a lawfully evil god. Are you still playing your paladin, or are you playing a completely different character who looks like your paladin? And like, that's the thing that I think a lot of gut reaction Warhammer players don't get, is that, you know, as Chuck pointed out, Horus isn't really Horus anymore. He's gone in a lot of ways. I mean, he's still there. It's not the same way that Fulgrim was like shoved into a corner of his mind until he went insane. It's not quite on that level. Horus made a pact with the dark powers, and then they twist him until he's doing what they want him to do. Who's in control? Who drives? It's a Ratatouille situation.
It's not Horus.
Yeah. And that's probably the big takeaway. At a certain point, it stops being Horus. Probably by the end of the drop site massacre, I would say that whatever was left of Horus is probably basically completely dead. As news of the drop site massacre of Istavan V reached Terra, Rogel, Dorn, and Malcador found themselves admitted to an audience with the Emperor for the first time in months. This is just to give context to all of that, like, Malcador feels separated from the Emperor, his constant companion for essentially thousands of years in this grand effort to reunite humanity, which is fucking with him. This is a dude that you see almost daily or can talk to daily, and then all of a sudden you just radio silence for like 6 to 8 months. Finally, they get in to see him. When they come in to see him, he is sat on top of a massive throne, 10 meters above them, made of golden metal and interwoven with arcane machinery. Behind this golden throne sits a pair of massive mechanized doors made of the same golden metal, containing a portal or locking a portal behind them. This portal led into the labyrinthian dimension of the Eldari Webway, a massive, instantaneously connected network between all of the Imperium's worlds. At least if the Emperor's plans had proven successful, this would have been the case. This webway portal, which the Emperor had constructed, and a short section of the webway passage beyond it, required a constant psychic level of maintenance, or it would have fallen into ruin. This had, at first, required a very small portion of the Emperor's attention and psychic might to do. So it required as much effort as, say, us remembering what time it is. However, the Emperor was now fully in the Chaos God's sights, and they had now directly compromised to get to him, spurred on by his Great Crusade. He started the Great Crusade, and the Chaos Gods were like, fuck you, the gloves are coming off. As part of their efforts, they had tempted the Primarch Magnus the Red with the knowledge of Horus's betrayal, so that gods knew how to manipulate Magnus. They showed Magnus what was coming, and they gave Magnus a hint at how he could get the knowledge to the Emperor. We've talked about this already. This knowledge led to Magnus and an attempt to warn his father to brute force his way past the carefully constructed protections around this small chunk of the webway and its portal. Magnus's folly had caused a breach that had allowed demons to flood into this chunk of the webway, destroying the army of tech adepts who had been tasked with the metaphysical maintenance. So originally, also helping the Emperor, there was essentially an army of tech adepts and tech priests inside this chunk of the webway that just constantly maintained it. That was their job. You know, it probably wasn't like for the rest of your life. It was probably like your 8-hour shift is to go in and sweep this area and make sure the walls are clean, or whatever psychic maintenance, metaphysical maintenance means. That's your 8-hour shift. And now it took almost all of the Emperor's psychic power and mental concentration to secure those doors. So there is no longer any attempt to secure and maintain that chunk of the webway. It has been breached, the way has been open, and demons have flooded in. Not only that, but the demons flooded into the palace itself, directly from the warp. And if they were able to get past those doors again, they would just 100% flood into the Imperial Palace. They would take it from the inside. It had already taken an army of Legio Custodes and the Silent Sisterhood to push back the first wave of these demonic invaders. And even though they had been successful, it had been costly. For every member of the Imperial forces that was lost was essentially irreplaceable. We've mentioned it before, but Legio Custodes are Astartes or Primarchs, but they are handcrafted. They're not mass-produced. Each one is a specific, separate work of art by the Emperor. The Silent Sisterhood is a little bit different, but again, this is a group of people that are born and trained blanks. These are not just somebody off the street of Terra. This is a very highly specialized, highly trained individual. And while they would fall and demons fell in their thousands, the demons were just banished and they could rally and take form again. So for every 1,000 or so that were defeated by the Legio Custodes and the Sisters of Silence, the Silent Sisterhood, there were 1,000 demons just ready to take their place. It didn't matter. No matter how much effort they gained in securing the palace, there were always more demons. There would always be more demons. And that's why the Emperor had to slam those doors shut. He had to close those gates. And when he did that, he actually cut off some of these Imperial forces. They were just left behind. And they would fight to their end, knowing that they had no means for escape. So those Legio Custodes and those members of the Silent Sisterhood that were on the wrong side of those gates when they slammed closed died horribly. But they died fighting. They died assuring that the Emperor could close the doors and that they could keep the demons away long enough for him to effectively lock it. You know, if you think of like that action in a movie when the doors are closed and then they have to slam that big bar down, but there's that chance that the invading army is going to push the door open before the bar is slammed down. There were people on the other side that made sure the Emperor could slam that bar down. For his folly, the Emperor had originally meant for Magnus to sit and take his place on the Golden Throne. This is actually the reason that Russ had been dispatched to bring the Primarch back to Terra. Magnus's punishment was going to be, you broke this, you fucking fix it. Your job now for the rest of your life is to sit on the Golden Throne while I fix it, because your dumbass broke it. However, even though he saw it as Magnus's responsibility and atonement, Magnus had decided to side with Horus, having fallen to Tzeentch. And now Malcador was the only surviving human who could take over and even hope to summon the amount of power the Emperor needed. And everyone knew that it was going to be a fraction of it. Malcador could only hold those doors for so long. This was all laid out before the siege. This is after the massacre. This is before the siege of Terra. So there are 7 years. There are 7 years between this meeting with Rogel, Dorn, Malcador, and the Emperor and the time that Malcador will actually have to take the seat. For 7 fucking years, you know that your time is going to come and you are going to be the only thing in the entire fucking galaxy that safeguards your entire race from death by demons. And you got to live with it for 7 fucking years.
Could be worse.
I mean, that's pretty, it's heavy. Pretty rough.
It's heavy shit.
That's rough. And it's
heavy
like,
fucking shit.
Fuck, bro. It's like, can I go find another psyker?
Yeah, right. Well, and at the same time, it points out another thing that Horus does kind of expertly. Whether or not Horus knows that the Golden Throne is a thing and that somebody's going to have to sit in power on it doesn't necessarily matter. Horus knows that he has to remove Magnus from the board because Magnus is a powerful psyker. So he makes sure that Lehman goes against Magnus, hoping that the gamble will pay off and Magnus will fall to his side. However, if he hadn't intercepted that message to Lehman, if he hadn't changed that message to make Lehman kill Magnus or attempt to kill Magnus, if Magnus had actually been imprisoned and brought back to Terra, problem fucking solved. Yep. He sits on the Golden Throne while the Emperor fixes the problem.
Yeah, that was a huge swing.
Yeah. What is it? Your battle plans only survive first contact with the enemy or whatever. It's one of those. It would be 7 years before Horus came to Terra and the siege itself began in earnest. 7 years in which Malcador could move pieces around the grand board of regicide that is the Imperium of Man. His actions founded the Inquisition, the Grey Knights, and even what would become the Ecclesiarchy. But all those are detailed stories for another time. When the call finally came, he was more than willing to lay down his life for the Emperor. But he had one task left to do. He returned to the Golden Throne accompanied by 12 hooded attendants and in stern silence. The Emperor surveyed those arrayed before him, seeing that his friend and faithful servant had done well. 4 of them were mortal lords and administrators possessing the greatest of inquisitive and unyielding of willpower and mind. These were the greatest inquisitive minds, the greatest thinkers that had the willpower and the fucking stomach to deal with what was to come. The other 8 were space marines, many of them knight-errant, whose abilities were peerless, as was their dedication to the Emperor. Even those who had come from the traitor legions had proven to be above reproach and loyal to the end, one of them being Gravriel Loken. Though he came from a traitor legion, there was no questioning that he was an Emperor's boy through and through. With the Emperor's approval of these 12 that Malcador had selected, he ascended the steps and took the Emperor's place on the Golden Throne. The Emperor, in his stead, took his place beside the Primarchs Rogaldorn and Sanguinius in the defense of Terra. More pointedly, the assault by teleportation to the vengeful spirit itself in orbit above the planet. Once he was sat upon the throne, Malcador couldn't even speak, as it took all of his concentration to hold the doors closed and the demons at bay. Quite possibly the second strongest psyker in all of the Imperium, even above the powers of Magnus. He was completely tapped and locked into a task that was slowly killing him. For unlike Magnus, Malcador was simply human. He was just a normal human perpetual. He wasn't a superhuman Primarch, and the task overwhelmed him, consuming his body and soul in a matter of hours. When Rogaldorn returned, the mortally wounded Emperor at his side, after the defeat of Horus, he was greeted by the wasted body of Malcador, sheathed in psychic lightning and tortured near to death by the bombardment of the collapsing Imperial webway. As the tech priests began to make the exchange that pulled the near-dead Malcador from the arcane machinery of the Golden Throne and had replaced him with the Emperor, Malcador sensed the end of his service had finally come, and life flickered from his eyes and his body crumbled into dust which blew across the stone floor of the throne room. However, in that last of moments, he had proven his loyalty once again, gathering and transferring every last ounce of his psychic energy to the Emperor, ensuring that the Emperor would survive what was to come. With this last flicker of power, the Emperor awoke from his coma briefly and gave his final commands to those to preserve the Imperium, as he would persevere for the next 10,000 years, wasting away himself inside the arcane life support system that is the Golden Throne, his psychic might flooding the now lost Imperial webway and holding it closed, holding back the worst of the warp from humanity, and boosting the beacon that is the light of the Astronomicon.
So not only is the Golden Throne the Astronomicon, it also was a webway portal that is now holding off demons.
The webway portal is behind the Golden Throne.
Right. But
so the webway portal is actually a different piece of technology, but the Golden Throne's ability to boost psychic energy is required by circumstance to hold the doors.
So not only would the light of the Astronomicon, if the Emperor were to die, fade away, and there'd be no way to travel through the warp, but the doors would open in the golden, right behind the Golden Flood of Terra, and just unleash demons into Terra.
As far as the belief system in the entire Imperial Creed goes, yes. Now, John Blanche actually had some statements that he made about the very famous picture of the Golden Throne, the one that's in one of the books.
Right. The one with the skeleton sitting on the Golden Throne.
I just want to say that brings a man tear to my eye just hearing that story.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Oh, yeah, like the whole way that Malcador dies is exceptionally sad.
Yeah.
And like he literally,
and I want all you Xenos lovers and Chaos people to realize all that was done for humanity.
Yeah, but humanity needs to Hudaiami. So the famous picture of the Emperor on the Golden Throne, where it's like a skeleton essentially just kept alive by a bunch of cables. I can't remember the exact quote, but to paraphrase, this is essentially an understood falsehood of the Imperium. This isn't actually supposed to be a representation of the actual Emperor from a lore perspective. So those of us outside looking at the lore, we're not supposed to take this as canon. This is a piece of artwork that exists inside of 40k that expresses how people who have never been to Terra or the Imperial Palace perceive it.
Yeah.
So
the
in
Corpse
that,
King.
John Blanche essentially suggests that the Emperor may not actually be alive and that there might not actually be anything on the Golden Throne. It may just literally be that last breath of Malcador and the Emperor's psychic energy that's powering everything. Which, I mean, at the end of the day, half a one, 6 dozen of another. What is that? Half a dozen of one, 6 of another.
Because
whatever
that all
that
goes
saying
back
is.
to all the other stories when everybody goes in, something happens, like when the Sisters of Battle are finally formed from what they were before,
right.
The main ones get brought in there and immediately come out and kill the dude running the Imperium. And they're like, Yeah, the Emperor spoke to us. This is what's happening now. So there's the whole...
Not primarily. Pretty much my favorite part of Imperial history, by the way, the whole Age of Apostasy. I'm super excited to get to 35. The 35th millennium, because I love all of the shit between Gorge Van Dyer and Sebastian Thor on like why the Sisters of Battle exist and what happened to the Silent Sisterhood, the Daughters of the Emperor, all are the Brides of the Emperor. I love all of that shit.
Yeah.
I love all of that shit. But yeah, it is one of those things. Like how much of it is just a psychic echo of these two extremely powerful people, and how much of it is the Emperor is still alive. And that's what we're supposed to, that is the debate we are supposed to endlessly be in. That's how they designed the lore, was that so that players would argue about it.
Yeah, so players argue about it. And the other hand, you could look at, okay, he's that powerful. He's also a perpetual. Why couldn't he still just be there regenerating himself constantly? And he looks like the day he did when they sat him there.
Well, and that's the other thing, is that he is so dead,
well, he was mortally wounded, so he was dying.
He was dying.
And this thing's keeping him from dying. So
and
it's
that's
not
what I'm saying. Remember, that happened to Gilman as well, and was in stasis for how long? So he could be slowly healing himself. You could go all sorts of angles with this part of the lore.
Yeah.
My personal belief is that Malcador's death shriek, Malcador's psychic death shriek, gave the Emperor just enough power to wake up from death, give Rogel Dorn the orders that Rogel needed to hear, and then the Emperor's psychic death shriek essentially joined with Malcador's, and that is what is trapped in the Golden Throne. It's their last psychic shriek.
Well, that's the door shut.
Just caught in a feedback loop. And that makes sense, because the only things that are actually happening is that door is kept shut and the beacon of the Astronomicon is lit. There's nothing else that's happening. I think all of the Emperor's tarot shit is people going in with the answer they want and manipulating the tarot deck to support their answer. Self-fulfilling prophecy. I think all of the people who have claimed to have spoken to the Emperor are claiming because it's the greater good, lie for the greater good. I don't think anything's actually there anymore. I think that if the Emperor exists, he exists as another chaos being, and a minor one. And that's the reason that he acts the way he does and grants powers to his saints and to other things. I think it's all just a psychic shockwave or a psychic loop at this point, a psychic echo. That was the word I was looking for. And that's my personal belief in the lore. And I think that answers a lot of questions, because there's that whole thing, well, if the Emperor ever eventually dies, all hell's going to go loose. Well, that doesn't become a question if the Emperor's been dead the entire time. If the Emperor's been dead the entire time and it's just a psychic feedback loop that's holding the doors closed, it doesn't matter if the Emperor dies, because it's just a psychic feedback loop that's holding the doors closed. It solves more problems than it answers. It's also entirely possible, and this kind of gets to Chuck's point, that door has been locked for so fucking long that webway chunk is just completely decayed and doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
That's entirely possible.
And everyone too can look into lore and stuff too and read all the stuff about there's, rumors of, Dorn has kept operating the whole time because he's the only one that understands it. That's why he had to fake his death. There's like all sorts of crazy things. I like the fact
tin hat theories are everywhere.
Yeah, they're everywhere. Well, I like the fact that GW's left so much of it open
on purpose.
Yeah, it's on purpose.
It gives them the ability to expand the lore in whatever direction will further the story.
Yeah, which is amazing, especially when the Emperor spoke to me, and this is why I did this.
Yeah. And how much of that is how much of that could literally just be another chaos entity? And that's the thing. Like, we always look at the chaos entities as being the four ruinous powers, and realistically, the things in the warp have their own agendas, and a lot of those agendas aren't in line with humanity, but some of them are. Some of the chaos entities don't really care either way. They're like, yeah, you stay in your lane, I'll stay on my lane. The thing with saints, the things with faith in the Emperor, the God Emperor's power, and the Band-Aid, we'll rip that Band-Aid off right now. All of that saint crap that the sisters do, all of that miracle crap that the sisters do, that's just psychic warp power. That's all it is. It's not miracles. They look at it as miracles, and they persecute everybody who does psychic witch stuff because of their zealotry. But that's just a human opinion on top of a physical phenomenon. That doesn't mean that their belief in miracles is true. It actually means that they're delusional. Like, that's what it means.
Yeah, just like the machine spirit type thing.
Right, exactly. It's just AI. We're just calling it something different because we don't want to.
Have you ever dealt with machines, Marky? They got spirits of their own in the real world. Trust me, dude.
Okay. So this is a funny aside before we close out the episode. Super funny aside. There's a gal on TikTok, and I came across, and she was like saging her 3D printer and a bunch of other stuff, and I was like, yes, canticles to the machine spirits.
Yes.
And she responded in like a way that like made me think she knew 40K, and I legitimately had on this woman's TikTok like a back and forth conversation with her being woo woo witchy and me just quoting 40K at her until I realized, oh, she doesn't know I'm making 40K jokes.
Wow.
This is literally just somebody who's woo woo witchy.
This is just sister battle.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's the thing. The way that these systems are built, the way that this fiction is built, is to play into our own superstitions, to play into historical superstitions and historical faith belief systems. And that's the reason that 40K is so interesting and rich, because it's playing with history. It's playing with these existing things.
So I don't want to touch on any nerves, but could you say Malcador is Jesus and died for the Emperor's sins?
I would think that Malcador would be a little bit closer to like to go to that example. I would say Malcador is a little bit more like Moses.
Oh, okay.
I would say Sanguinius. I would say, this is what I would say. If we want to go to biblical examples, I don't think anything that happens during the Heresy deals with anything in the New Testament. It's all Old Testament stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's essentially the fall of the angels. It's the fall of the choir of angels and the establishment of hell. That is the story of the Horus Heresy. It's a very Old Testament story. You know, Horus is Lucifer. Sanguinius would be not Michael. Was it Michael, Gabriel, or Azrael?
Gabriel?
Was it Gabriel that was like his wings were shredded and he was killed by being cast into hell?
I think it's Gabriel, yeah.
He was a good guy, but he died in hell on fire. Yeah. That would be Sanguinius. I don't think anybody fits the archetype of Jesus in 40K. I mean, maybe you could make an argument that Reboot might be like, that would be my argument would be, if somebody made a strong argument that 40K is the New Testament, I would be like, I still feel like we're in the Old Testament, but okay, maybe. But yeah, I don't think anybody really fits well.
Gotcha.
I would say, but I could definitely see Malcador as like he's a Moses figure. He's that almost exactly.
Yeah.
10 Commandments.
Yeah, gotcha. The commandments.
Follow all my laws. Even kind of to the fact that like a lot of the shit that Moses does, you're like, are we the baddies? Like Moses does some shit where you're like, bro, we're supposed to be the good guys. Can you stop genociding things? Like the Old Testament goes hard. I'm just saying. Daddy, I don't like him. Bring his head to me on a silver platter for my birthday. That's the type of shit that happens in the Old Testament. I'm just laying it out there. Anyway, that will wrap it up for our coverage on Malcador the Sigilite. Don't worry, we'll be back to talk about those 4 humans and 8 Astartes warriors when we get into the foundation of the Inquisitors and the Grey Knights in more detail. We also plan to look into the Remembrancers in more detail, with Euphrates Keeler most likely getting her very own Heroes of 40K episode. And Euphrates Keeler and Malcador work together to establish what becomes the Ecclesiarchy when Malcador realizes that religion is a potent tool that the Imperium needs to use and that the Emperor needs to use, not only to defeat Horus, but to ensure the survival of humanity, which is a very interesting turn of things.
Which is creating that other chaos god you talk about, which is the Emperor reborn.
They had to. Like, Malcador realized they had to. If humanity was to survive, they had to go 100% back on the Imperial truth. The Imperial Creed was created because the Imperial truth wasn't going to ensure that humanity lived. It's a very weird, not catch-22, it's an irony. It's an ironic thing that had to happen. And we'll definitely get into that when we talk about Euphrates Keeler. Anyway, if you want to get into contact with us about any of our episodes or this show or the show in general, You can reach us through email at underthehiveofmadness@gmail.com. By the way, if you listen to Under the Realms of Madness, there is no Under the Realms of Madness at gmail.com. Email, it's all underthehiveofmadness@gmail.com for both shows. Just hit us up.
Also, feel free to join our community on Discord. Not only can you talk about anything with us that has to do with lore, hobby, tactics, Warhammer 40k, but you can also get involved in other topics such as Age of Sigmar, magic, role-playing games, video games, and much more. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, or at our website, underthehiveofmadness.com. Also, feel free to check out battle reports and other video content with our friends at Improbable Wargaming on YouTube. Just search Improbable Wargaming on all platforms. Spelling and links should be in the show notes.
Help us grow by liking and reviewing us wherever you get your podcast fix. Our home is Spotify, but you can also find us on Apple, Google, Audible, and many, many more. You can also support us directly on Patreon at www.patreon.com/underthehiveofmadness. All Patreon members get access to video podcasts with minimal editing. So you can see all of our beautiful faces and hear just how bad I am at reading English that I have written, proofread, grammatically corrected, and spell corrected, and still can't seem to read. Plus, if we have any weird side blunders or somebody says Dragon D's nuts across your face, all of that stuff ends up on Patreon. All Patreon levels also get access to our quarterly painting contest. Plus, we have perks at higher levels, so go on over and check that out. We've started to do monthly giveaways. We are continuing to grow with that and figure all of it out. So joining Patreon is a good way to get involved with that stuff. And yeah, there's some other stuff in the works coming down the pipeline, including a role-playing game that we'll be running through Twitch, and we'll be releasing a lot of the rules, backgrounds to stories, and some extras through Patreon as well. So if you want to jump ahead of any of that, you can do that now. Plus, at this point, there are probably a couple of 100 hours of extra content that is just Patreon specific. We talk about state of the game, our thoughts on how things are changing, rules considerations. We talk
recent
about models
releases
we like or hate. Yeah, recent releases, our hobby progress. The Hangnail, neutral territory for all the Hive's many gangs, including those who carry our bitey badges. Home of the coldest Amisock shots on all of Arconia. Working hard to be everything the Arbites ever warned you about, all while shattering whatever's left of the piece. We are 665.66 UHMR Chemrat Radio. Reminding all of you Chemrats, Hive Mice, and Sump Ghoulies to keep those dials fixed right here. Same ratty frequency for a dose of the same ratty-ass attitude.
In the Hive Shroud, they do dwell. Four-armed emperors, a grim tale to tell. Their claws and their eyes filled with dread. Keep the light, or you'll wish you were dead.
That one seemed like it was better?
I think that was better.
Seemed like it was better, yeah.
Read a book.